Well, we're going to continue in our series today, All in the Family. And last week we talked about singlehood. Today we're going to talk about marriage. There was a pastor one time who asked a little boy if he knew what the word matrimony means. That's a pretty big word, right? I mean, matrimony, what does that mean? And the little boy replied to the pastor, said, "Sure, I know what it means." He said, "It's a place between heaven and hell where a man and woman or a woman pays for her sins." Last week we recalled that the calling to singleness is a good one, but it's not for everyone. And with all the news that we hear about marriage, it often doesn't seem so good, does it? It seems like statistics show that less people are getting married, more people are getting divorced. Marriage is being redefined by a culture that's in contradiction to God's word. And so we have to ask this question, does marriage even matter anymore? Does it even matter? Now, I know for some of you, you may think, well, no, duh, yeah, but I think that this is a question that's kind of floating around out there in a lot of people's minds, especially those who are of the younger generations. Now, I know that for those of you who are married over these last couple of years, it's been tough. I know that COVID has really put a lot of pressure on marriages. I know recently I've met with several couples who are going through a lot of struggles, and I know they're not the only ones. I've heard from other people of things that are happening. And I know that there are varying levels of stress in marriages right now. Everybody's going through it. And sometimes it can really feel like, with the hard times that you go through in marriage, it can really make you wonder, does it really matter? Does marriage really matter? And sometimes you might even want to feel like in a marriage when things are going bad, that it would just be better if I just got out of it. That this marriage doesn't matter, it's not worth it. But you know what? Marriage, I think marriage, we know that marriage matters, but I think we've forgotten why it matters. I think we can forget that sometimes. One of the things that happens so often in relationships is that we can take those relationships for granted, can't we? I think we've all been guilty of doing that, whether it's in a marriage or a friendship or maybe a co-worker relationship, somebody at school. We all take for granted the relationships that we have. And I think marriage is one of those. And we can easily let life get in the way, and we can forget why the people we spend life with matter. So thankfully, we have the Word of God that is there to remind us that why marriage is important, and that it does matter, and that marriage is a very powerful tool that God wants to use in many people's lives. Not everybody, but in many people's lives. Because we know that God created relationships because He wants relationship. Think about it. I mean, that was why He created us, wasn't it? He wanted to have relationship with us. And so He also knew, because we're created in His image, that we needed relationships with others. And we know that all relationships matter, but marriage was created way back in Genesis as a way of bringing together two people for a very powerful purpose. And so today we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. That's where we were last week. We were in verse 8 last week and also in verse 22 last week. But today we're going to be in the first 7 verses where Paul, again, he talks a little bit about singleness like we looked at last week, but focuses primarily on marriage. And he shows us why marriage matters. And he shows us how a marriage can experience the power that God intends for it. So let's go ahead and read it. It says, "Now for the matters you wrote about, it's good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. And the husband shall fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. And in the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer, and then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Now, look what he says here in verse 6. He says, "I say this as a concession, but not as a command. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, and another one that one." Now, when we read these verses, there's a lot to unpack here. I could probably do a whole sermon series on marriage from these verses. But there's some things here that I first want to point out to us that shows why marriage really does matter. So let's go ahead and look at these, just 3 of them here. The first one is that marriage protects us from danger. That's what Paul says here. He says that marriage protects us from danger. Now, Paul, while knowing that it's not for everyone, he also knows that there are some people who have this sexual drive that drives them so much that for it to happen outside of the marriage boundary is a very dangerous thing. And so that's why he says that marriage is something that is good for those who maybe would want to go off into this territory that can lead to very dangerous things. Also, the foundation of the family is within marriage. Now, oftentimes, kids are the focus within families. I've run into this a few times through the years, and I always have to remind couples that your children, and some of you in here in this service especially, you've got children that are older, but it's very easy to start thinking that your children are the center of your marriage. No, or your family. No, the center of your family is your marriage. And I have to remind families of that sometimes because or marriages because of that sometimes, because what happens is the kids and their schedules and everything that's going on, it can kind of take you in all these different directions, and then you start losing that connection with each other. So it's so important. So some of you in here, you already have children who are married and have kids. That might be something good to remind them of, is to remind them of how important it is for them to spend time together and to grow their marriage. Because see, it is within the marriage the children and even the couple themselves, where they are protected. And that's what Paul's saying here. He's saying it's within this relationship that you are protected from danger. Now, there's something else that's here. He also shows us that marriage is a covenant that grows us. You know, when you are married, you promise before God to be there for each other. You make a covenant with each other. You make a covenant before God that you will be there for each other. Now, if you look in verse 3, in verse 3, there's this word here. It says the husband should fulfill his marital, what does it say there? Duty to his wife. Well, that sounds like an ugly word. I have a duty to well, what is Paul trying to say there? You know, I was very interested in this word because I thought, it's kind of an odd word. So I looked a little deeper into it. This word can also be described or translated as a debt. So I reread this, and I'm like, okay, the husband should fulfill his marital debt to his wife, and likewise, the wife should fulfill her debt to her husband. Debt. And then I got to be thinking, whenever somebody loves us, there is a debt in a way that we owe them, because all of us in some way are unlovely, aren't we? I know I am in many ways. And for a person to choose to love you and to be there for you and to support you and to encourage you, there is a sense of debt that's there. And I think by remembering that, there's something so important. I'm going to get into this here in just a few minutes a little bit more, but if we start realizing within our relationships, and I'm going to widen this out, not just in marriages, just in relationships in general. If we're reminded of the debt that we owe to others because of their love and their care for us, it takes us a long way to removing the selfishness that so often damages and destroys relationships. If we're reminded every day that we owe this debt, if that's in the forefront of our mind and our hearts, it helps us to think, hey, wait a minute, this isn't about me, because I owe them. It's not about me. I think that's so important. I think it's a beautiful illustration. And let's think about what this looks like when it comes to Jesus. Don't we owe a debt to Jesus for his love? Think of that. I mean, we owe him a debt. Now, thankfully, he doesn't ask us to pay it. He already paid it on the cross. But if we were reminded of how much we owe him, or even how much we owe each other, or the ones that love us, it has a way of removing from ourselves our selfish attitudes and behaviors. So I think that's what Paul's saying here. He's saying, if you just remember, husbands, if you just remember, wives, of what you owe to each other because they have chosen to love you, then it will take away the selfishness that so often ensues within a marriage. Now, there's a third thing here. He also says that marriage, and I want to make sure, marriage can promote peace. Now, unfortunately, all too often, we see marriages that are the opposite. They're they are rocky, they are broken. And so I want to ask you, and I've had some people say, well, I see so many broken marriages, so marriages, it just doesn't matter anymore. But what I would say to them is that really the problem with marriage? Because the institution of marriage itself is not what's at fault. It's not marriage that's at fault for all of the problems that we see within marriage itself. It's humans. It's our brokenness. It's our sinfulness. It's our selfishness. This institution, this relationship that God created in marriage, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing, but it's not the fault of the institution itself with the problems that we see with it today. You know, Paul interestingly points out here as well, if you look if you look a little bit later on down in the passage, that he talks about that we should strive to live in peace, especially if a woman or a guy is married to a non-Christian woman or guy. And I think that's really important for us to see and really important for us to remember. So we see here that marriage does matter, that it really does matter. You know, one time there was a young man who came into a pastor's office and he was just ready for a divorce. He was just ready to leave his relationship. He complained that his bride, his wife, was so bossy that she was driving him off the walls. He wanted things to change immediately. And so the pastor gave him some advice. Not sure if it was the best advice, but told him that he needed to build his self-esteem and that it would take time. So he was given a book on how to be not aggressive in their relationship, but assertive, to lay out the way that he saw things. And so he was so desperate to change things that he read the whole book on this on the way going home. So by the time he reached his house, he reads the whole book. And he's determined. He's like, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I'm going to stand up. So he storms into the house. Not sure that he got the right idea from this book, but he stormed into the house and he walks into his wife and he points a finger into her face and he says, from now on, I want you to know that I am the man of this house and my word is law. I want you to make me a meal tonight. I want you to make me a great dessert. I want you to do the things that I'm asking or telling you to do. And when I'm finished taking my shower, I want you to dress me and I want you to comb my hair. He says, guess who's going to do this? And she says, the funeral director. You know, sometimes it can seem like the mess we see in so many marriages is because of this attitude that we see right here in the story, where it becomes about me. It becomes about our selfishness. So many messes I see because the focus is on oneself rather than the other. You know what? God created marriage, as we've already seen, to protect us from danger, to grow us, to remove from us our selfishness, to promote peace. And if we allow God to do that in marriage, we can find its power, because here's the point today, is that marriage finds its power when the you is through. So that's where the power of marriage is. I want to look at another passage just briefly here. If you look at Ephesians chapter 5, I'm not going to read the entire passage in verses 21 through 33. In Ephesians 5, 21 through 33, I would say it's probably one of the most controversial passages that's in the New Testament. Because we see there some things about submission that in our culture today don't seem to be very popular. But there's something that I think that is really important. Sometimes we get wrapped up in all the stuff that's there that we forget something that's said at the very beginning. If you look in Ephesians 5:21, here's what it says. It says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he goes on, he talks about submission with husbands and wives. But we have to remember that he starts this whole passage and this whole discussion there in Ephesians 5 by saying that we should submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. See, the reason marriages fail is often due to selfishness. I've already touched on this. You know, in my own experience, when I have messed up in my own marriage, it's been because I have been selfish. Because I'm thinking of myself and what I want. And again, I know I'm talking a lot about marriage today, and I know not everybody here is married, those of you online. But doesn't this translate over into any relationship? I mean, selfishness has a way of destroying any relationship. And here's what sometimes can happen within a marriage. Within a marriage, because of this selfishness, you start thinking these things like, listen to these statements. I deserve to be with someone better than this. Or I deserve to be happy. That's one that I hear. Or I should be able to do what I want to do because they can do it. What I hear there is selfishness, selfishness, selfishness. And it can come in other forms too. I mean, we can show selfishness in other ways. Maybe somebody could choose to put tons of money on a credit card or buy things without talking with their spouse. Or maybe it could be a time thing where one spouse just works and neglects the other. Maybe it's persisting in a bad health habit by being selfish about it and not realizing how it affects the one that you love. Now, does God want you to be happy? Well, yeah, but that's not his goal for you. God's goal for you is to be holy. God's goal in you is to sanctify you, is to grow you. And so again, your marriage finds its power when the you is through. When you continue to remove the you and it's an us. Because see, when you see marriage as something bigger than you, then I'm going to sound like Yoda off of Star Wars, then a better marriage you will have. Right? When you see marriage as something bigger than you, then a better marriage you will have. You know, I've been married for 20 years, and something I've come to realize is that God is doing something more than what is just happening between Adriana and I. There's something more going on. Yes, there is our love and there is our relationship with one another, but there's something else going on. God is using my marriage. It's one of the means that he's using to mold me into a person that is less focused on me. There's something bigger going on than just that relationship. And not only has it helped me in my relationship with Adriana, but it's helped me in my relationship with my kids and with others. It's made me less selfish in other ways. You know, I think of some things that I did when I first came to our church here 17 years ago, and I look back, I'm like, that was so selfish. But I think what's happened is over the years, through my marriage and other means, God is removing the you, the me, from this. Now, yes, we know that God created marriage to be a powerful partnership. But he's also using marriage, one of the means is to make you a better person. And I think he does that through our friendships and other relationships as well. So here's where I want to challenge you today. I want you to think a little bit today. I want you to discover where the you is starting to make things brew. So let's think right now. Where are things going on in your life right now? Not within marriage, that's what we're specifically looking at, but just relationships in general. Where is something starting to brew? Where are things starting to bubble up a little bit? Here's a few ways that maybe it could be bubbling up a little bit. I want to share a few with you. Here's the first one. The first thing we can do if we want to try to steer clear and start to grow in our relationships is this one, is to learn how to handle an insult. Now, I know this one sounds hard, but let me tell you, in any relationship, words are said sometimes that you later regret. We've all done it. We've all been hurt in some way by someone with the words or an insult or something that's said, and it's really hard to not bring the you out when you feel like you're being attacked. There's something that might brew in you that just wants to come out. And again, it could be your spouse being unkind. It could be a coworker. I like what it says in Proverbs. There's 3 verses we're going to look at in Proverbs just briefly, but I want to point out to you today that really give us some instruction today. In Proverbs 12:16, it says this. It says, fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. So what's he saying there? He's saying that if you're insulted or a word comes your way that you don't appreciate it, that you don't like, it is better for you to what? To overlook it, to show forbearance, to show love, to show forgiveness. But what does a fool do? He says that a fool, well, they just go off right then at once. I tell you, this is one that's been hard for me through the years, and I think I've gotten a little better, but it's still hard. Why is that? Because it's selfishness. I have to stand up for myself. You know, unfortunately in our world today, I see this a lot. We see an insult that pops up in the public square, maybe it's on social media or wherever, and people feel like they always have to respond. No, you don't. No, you don't. See, in a marriage and in any relationship, I think this is really good advice. Because so often what can happen is when an insult comes our way, then we respond, then what does it do? It escalates it. It escalates the situation and it makes it worse. You can be the person that brings peace back into that relationship by choosing not to respond to that and instead responding with love. You know, there's a saying out there that goes that's like this. It says that hurt people hurt people. You ever heard that before? Hurt people hurt people. I see it in marriages. I see it in friendships. And I think it's important for us sometimes to stop and take this verse for what it says. Because if you were to take this verse to heart, what it means is that you're going to stop and you're going to consider where that insult is coming from. Because chances are there's a hurt. There's a pain that's there. There's something underlying it and trying to understand it. I think as the church and as Christians, we have to get better at this. There's a lot of hurt people and a lot of things going on around us, and then we wonder why sometimes Christians are mocked or things are done against the church or whatever. We have to look deeper into what is behind that. And that's what's being said here. Don't just jump back. Don't just insult back or hurt back. Consider where the hurt is coming from. So again, that's one thing that we can do to maybe keep the things that are brewing to bring them down. How about this one as well? And this is kind of what I've been touching on, is to replace the you with God. You know what? In your marriage or other relationships, I can tell you right now, things will always brew when it is you that's at the center of it. If you're struggling with a friendship or your marriage, stop and consider if there's a big part of you in this. And what could happen if you took the you out of it and you made God a bigger part of it? In Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools, so again, we're talking about fools again, like we just looked at there earlier in Proverbs, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of the repairing of your relationship. How would Jesus respond? It has to start with God. How would God want you to respond to that comment or that action? What attitude would God want you to have in that moment? You know what? Marriage, I think, is a great discipliner, and that's a good thing. Let God lead the way you handle your marriage. Try to remove yourself and ask yourself, what would God do in this moment with my spouse? Again, replace the you with God. And then here's another thing that I think can bring the brew down a little bit. And that is to learn to love the truth. To learn to love the truth. You know what? Jesus told us what? He said the truth will set us free. But sometimes the truth, well, we don't like it, do we? And that is especially true in marriage. I can't tell you how many times where I've been shown that I wasn't right, and I hate it. I hate it when I'm not right. But as I've gotten a little older, at times now I've gotten better at saying, you know what, I'm glad that I was shown that I was wrong because it's growing me, and I'll respond better the next time. You know what, sometimes we can hold on to falsehoods about ourselves in our marriage or in our relationship simply because it fits the way we think things should be. We create sort of this false reality. But you know what we do when that happens? We're just imprisoning ourselves even more by not being confronted with the truth. It's good to just come clean. Another verse, Proverbs 23:23. It says, buy the truth and do not sell it. Wisdom, instruction, and insight as well. I love that. You see what he's saying there? He says, go out and do whatever you've got to do to get the truth, and don't give it away. Don't be afraid, even if it means that you're wrong sometimes. Don't be afraid to want and go and get the truth. Unfortunately, I think that is a humongous problem culturally we have right now. is we want to create our own truth. And when the truth doesn't fit the reality we want, we create our own truth. And so what do? We sell it. Maybe it's to make us feel better or to make us look better or whatever it might be. We have to desire it, even if it points out to us that we're wrong. That's why I believe the gospel of Jesus and the truth that's contained in there, why some people don't respond to the gospel is because it is truth and it doesn't fit the mold for some people. It truly is a miracle when we stop and consider and when we come to Christ, because we realize that we are broken people, that we are sinners, that we're not always right, but that Jesus can make us right. That's why the gospel is so good. See, my challenge for us is, if you find a place of contention, see it as the first step to a better marriage. You know, right now, whether it's in your marriage or another relationship, I want to challenge you to think again of this place of contention where things are brewing. It could be a decision on finances. It could be, how do you spend on this, that, or the other? It could be the way you communicate. It could be about the way that you're handling your kids. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that it is the end of the world when conflict pops up in relationships. And something I've tried to train my mind to do is, instead, when conflict pops up in relationships, see it as an opportunity. This is actually one of the things when I do marriage counseling that I try to encourage people to do. It's not always easy, but when you have a disagreement with each other, see it as an opportunity, first of all, to help you find a solution, but secondly, it's an opportunity for you to grow. You're going to learn something through that, at least about yourself or about the other person. See it as an opportunity to grow. So again, if you have a place of contention right now, see it as the first step to a better marriage, because conflict is a signal of where growth can happen. Whenever conflict comes up, say, okay, ding, 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 this is a place where I can grow. And it changes your whole perspective on conflict, doesn't it? If you think like that. But all too often, what do? Is I see people run from conflict. They run away from it. If they have a problem with somebody at work, what do? They run from it rather than talk about it. They run away from marriages because of conflict. People run away from friendships. They leave churches. They quit jobs because they don't want to deal with conflict. They don't want to grow through it. It's just easier to give up on it. But what would happen if, instead of running from conflict, we ran toward it? We talked with the person that we were in conflict with. Again, you know what would happen? You would grow. You would grow. Don't miss out on the opportunities that it can bring. One time, Randy Frazee shared this story. He said, I remember one time seeing a picture of a husband and a wife in a gentleman's office that he went to, and he told the man, that's such a nice picture. And when he turned around and he looked at the man had tears in his eyes, and so he asked him, he says, why are you crying? And here's how he responded. He said, there was a time in our marriage when I was unfaithful to my wife, and she found out about it. She was so deeply hurt and injured, she was going to leave me and take the kids with her. I was overwhelmed at the mistake that I had made, and I shut the affair down. I went to my wife in total brokenness, knowing that I did not deserve for her to answer in the affirmative, and I asked her to forgive me. And you know what she did? She forgave me. And that picture up there on the wall, he told him, was a picture that was taken shortly after that. And whenever I see this picture, he said, I see a woman who forgave me. I see a woman who is willing to stand with me in this picture. So when he told Randy, he says, so when you see this picture, you say, nice picture. But when I see this picture, I see my life that was given back to me again. Wow. How was his wife able to do that? Because she was willing to let go of herself. So today, if we want to find the power of marriage, the power to forgive, the power to give life back again, that's what God wants to use marriage relationships to do. That's the power that's there. And so let's let go of you. Let go of me. Let's find the power of it again.